Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for another episode in which Berto and I talk about Teal Swan and break it down. What do you say, Berto? Let's do it.
Sounds awesome.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda. I wear rings on my toes.
So let's go over her shtick, her approach.
Let's do it.
So how would you describe what she does?
From what I could see, and a little bit after the documentary, okay, so first, she does have these large events, which are essentially recruiting events and energizing events for her community. However, if you go in a level deeper, it seems like you can go to these retreats and there you're doing very, very hands-on, so to speak, work where you are guided through a series of both physical things like the dunking in the water and whatnot, but also very directed, somewhat confrontational exchanges about what you believe and what you think you are and all these kinds of things. I feel, this wasn't like explicitly demonstrated step by step, but I feel there was some aspects of what I saw in the landmark thing, which is we need to get you to the point where we fully break you down because your reality is not what your reality is. And this whole thing about like, you got to find your truth, that whole thing, and the process of completion. We're going to complete you. That seems very familiar, which is like, we're going to tear you down and rebuild you from the ground up.
Yeah. And the completion involves almost seemingly always the revelation that you were abused by your parents.
That seems to be the common thread.
Yeah. And whether you know it yet or not. And there are reports from former members that blew out of the whole program who were like, my parents are great, but Teal Swan did not like that. She got angry at me and was telling me that my father had done that she knew because she had a psychic connection, and Teal Swan was coming at her from all these different angles like, well, then I know you were abused in a previous lifetime.
Oh, wow. Where was this? Did you see this It
was one of the individuals being interviewed for the podcast.
Okay. So that it's funny. Maybe I just don't have enough of these things to compare it to, but a lot of these things remind me of the brief time I spent in Landmark and all the research I did after the fact on websites about it. But seriously, there was that aspect of whenever I gave an answer that seemed not controversial, it seemed like the moderator would just like instantly lose interest in me.
Right.
And
tell me about your father. Oh, he was fine.
Yeah.
And then the moderator would be, there's an emotional punishment to that. And if you say, well, my father was abusive, then the moderator, the leader, leans in emotionally, which rewards you. And if you're vulnerable to that, then you start going in that direction.
Well, it's so much so that, the honest reason I left the thing without finishing the seminar wasn't even because of what I felt were somewhat abusive practices that day. Actually, it was because I was sitting around and listening to everyone's things, and I'm like, I'm a dick. I'm here because I want to unblock my writing process. And these people are like, my family just blew up in a missile, or like horrible things, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, they should have the forum here. This is not for me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I did get a lot of that, which is, if
you don't fit in,
and whenever I was saying like, well, I don't think that's the problem, it's like, well, you don't know what the problem is, or like trying to break me down, break my assumptions down. And sure, some of it I am defensive at times and things, but I think there's an extreme to it.
Oh yeah. When I was 18, I was recruited into Scientology briefly. I didn't know it. I filled out this. I was at Winchell's Donuts board this summer, and there was this survey that you could take, and this is 1989, so there's no internet or anything. So I just filled it out. I was bored. It was a personality test, and so you fill it out.
And they just it was lying there or something?
I think it was literally just lying on one of the tables. Okay. And like Scientologists put it there. I filled it out. I mailed it in, and a while later, I get a call because I fill out with my phone number, and I'm completely gullible because it says free personality test. And just give us your phone number. I get this phone call, and she sends me this readout, and it has these 10 different scales, and it looks like the MMPI, but it's not. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And she starts to tell me things about myself, and then she actually had me come in. And so I went into this small room in Bellevue, and it looked like a clinical office. And then she starts to go over my personality, and we're supposed to go through all 10 points of my personality. We start on number 1, and that's the only one we got to.
No.
Because for the next hour, she is telling me, and I could tell like she was out of her element, Donnie, that
she's a trainer or something?
She was a trainee. I mean. Yeah, like she was the new person.
Right.
Because she didn't seem to be standing on very firm ground. And looking back, she could have literally been like 22 years old.
Like, right. Where you're like, they're reciting what they've been told, but if you push into it a little bit, they don't really remember what they were told to say.
Well, so I'll tell you what happened. Being me, I challenged a lot of what she was saying because I had spent a lot of time as an 18-year-old investigating myself. I didn't know myself yet.
Yeah.
And was probably wrong about myself. But at the very least, I felt like someone telling me based on a very dubious personality test and it was something wrong with me. They were like, This is number 1. All these indicate there's something wrong with you. Number 1 thing wrong with you is this. And I was like, well... And I remember thinking, it doesn't really rest. Now, looking back, it's possible that she was right, but at the time, I'm like, I don't know. And so I was debating with her because I thought that's what we were kind of there to do.
Well, in either case, the approach clearly wasn't working.
Well, then she gets frustrated, and I see her getting a little frustrated, and I'm like, she's getting frustrated. I'm not frustrated. She's frustrated.
Yeah.
Then she starts to cry.
Oh.
Now, it's not my fault. I didn't say anything was wrong with her. She's saying something's wrong with me. And I'm like,
but she's trying to do her job that she thinks she's trying to do.
Yeah, and she's like, I can't. We're on number 1. We're not even to number 2 yet. And I don't know how it ended, but I remember just being like, well, I guess this isn't for me. And I think she was trying to get me to sign up for classes, and I walked away. It wasn't until years later that I figured out, that was Scientology, because I heard someone describing a very similar thing.
So you actually didn't even know after the fact immediately, though.
No, because cults don't tell you.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Now, I want to be clear about Landmark and about Teal Swan's approach, that it is a very standard approach that a lot of therapists will utilize, by the way, and a lot of spiritual healers and a lot of self-help healers, sort of self-help people.
Yeah.
Teal Swan, Landmark, what they are doing is mundane in my world. Professors use it. I've kind of used it in my classes, not nearly to that extent, but creating an emotional experience. For example, in one of my classes, towards the end of the quarter, when we've spent a lot of time kind of bonding and feeling more safety, talking about our child. It's a class completely designed on childhood experiences for the therapists and their issues, because they need to know those issues so they can manage their own countertransference, their own vulnerabilities to countertransference. At the end of the quarter, I do an empty chair exercise with everyone. And there's a whole caveat that I do around, like, don't go places where you're not going to be safe and you can bow out at any time. All you got to do is just close your eyes and just don't do it. You don't even have to reveal you're not doing it, and I won't call on you. So just monitor yourself. And there's a whole thing there of safety and all. And I asked them to imagine one of their parents, and then they look at their parents and they kind of do a relaxation. They look at their parents, and then I tell them, I want you to say whatever you want to say to them, whatever it is. And you can say whatever you want. And then think about that for a second, then write it down. And then I think I have them imagine, okay, now imagine what your parent would say back to you. And where I get them to go, and especially given the material, and especially since they're training to be a therapist, they go to pretty deep places.
Yeah.
And some people have been pretty mistreated by their parents. So there can be a lot of crying. There could be a lot of experience. And then I ask does anyone want to share what happened? Completely voluntarily.
Right.
Inevitably people will step forward and say, well, this is what happened. There's a lot of crying. There's a lot of bonding. People go over and hug people. And I might cry as a professor. It's a very emotional experience. I'm doing it for a number of reasons. One, to demonstrate that model of therapy, empty chair work. Two, to help them, to give them a chance experientially to get in touch with their vulnerability, which will be touched on as a therapist in countertransference issues, because clients will emulate that and will get you, and you got to know that, and you got to get comfortable. You got to heal from it. You're not going to do it in this class. You got to do it in therapy. And also I want to have, as a kind of a distant number 4, the students bond.
Yep.
I want them
that makes sense.
It's in the first quarter of school, and I want to create an experience for them that they can walk away from going, I'm glad I came to this university. Now, you could say, that's manipulative because I'm trying to indoctrinate them into the cult of my program, or I'm doing them a service by helping them to feel connected to each other and to the program and to me and to feel safe and to have an experience.
Do you tell them that the only place they can find solace and find help is through you?
No. So that's the big difference is one, there's 3 other professors doing the very similar process.
But if they leave the university
and
other
programs are doing very similar things, and they could go to Landmark and have probably a more intense experience, and they go to therapy, right. So what Teal Swan is doing is very run of the mill. She does this in her large group things, in the small group things, in her one-on-ones, but it isn't bad. Like I said, I do a version of that. It helps a lot of people. It can harm people, but my model could harm a student. Sure. It hasn't, because I have a lot of caveats to that, and it's done with students that I know very well, and we don't let just anyone into the program. But, could I harm someone, if inadvertently? Yeah. Has it happened and I just didn't know about it because the student felt intimidated, didn't want to tell me? Could have happened. So I'm not saying that because it's run of the mill, it's dumb and ineffectual. I'm saying that she has probably, and from accounts, helped a tremendous amount of people. Now, as you say, the problem is when you do that very run of the mill thing that is a helpful, very well-established, known exercise, and then you claim, I am the only one, and everyone else doesn't know what they're doing. Now it's a manipulation or a distortion or self-serving lie or something.
In a different field, but so many things related to it, because I remember one of the Amway presentations I went to, it was so much of what they say, you could make a similar analogy where it's like, because they were presenting about like, work can be tough, work can suck. Who wants to work all their life? Don't you want to, relax, spend time with your family and stuff? True, right? And then they'll point out things like, when you work for someone, you're working for their dream and stuff. And like, true. Like, and there's so many things that they'll say that are true. They're not true, and that you won't just hear from them. Mm-hmm. Like you will hear them from a Tony Robbins. I don't want to throw people under the bus. You'll just hear them all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Your friend,
absolutely,
that is into New Age.
Even further, what is it that they want you to do to start with? Here's the deal: you'll become a salesperson for our stuff. So pre-buy some of our product and then go sell it. Okay, it's a little annoying or shady that I have to give you money and then start, but fine, let's go with it. That's not where it ends. The shores don't end there.
Right,
it keeps going and going, and then you need more investment, more money, more da-da-da-da.
And the effort seems to either inadvertently or by design benefit the organization and the leader.
Yeah. The thing they're telling you that you do when you're a sucker at a company, you're doing 10x for them.
Yeah.
Because now you're getting less money than you would have been at the company, and you're making them 10x the money that they would have been. Right. So, but that's just an analogy, because I think that there are similar things where you can, like to your point, have perfectly reasonable, tested, tried and true systems in place that you use, and then you layer things on top of them that make it still unhealthy, or still dangerous, or still damaging.
And makes you so much more important to the followers. It makes you so much more money. It gives you so much more power. It gives you so much more narcissistic supply.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like, this is another side note, that the more and more I look into Teal Swan, I have this impulse. I don't know if it's my professor supervisor impulse to talk with her and say, look, these things you're doing are great, particularly if you get a master's degree. What you're doing is run of the mill.
Go back it up.
Yeah, or take some courses or have. And another thing that I heard from outside sources was during a lot of these events, they have therapists, licensed therapists who are followers of hers, but still they're licensed. Yeah. And they're there on purpose to help people that might be having a clinical issue. So it's not like they're just completely flapping in the wind.
Right.
So I have this urge to tell her, let's shore up the professionalism, the ethics, and let's call it something. Well, you can call it whatever you want. Call it the completion. Doesn't matter.
But just plug the gaps of the...
But let's get rid of these things. When you're putting down other fields in a way that might steer people away from other helpers, then I don't think you're helping society. I don't think you're helping your people. And I think you're damaging your reputation by saying a bunch of false things.
Well, she said an interesting statement, which of course, how many statements would a person like her make that may or may not stick? But one of the things she said in one of those scenes was, I don't want to fight the establishment. I want to work with them.
Yeah. And then in this, so I don't know if you watched the same video that I did, the suicide, the updated approach that she says. She says that, but then she says, mainstream approach, mental illness doesn't work at all. She says, we are backwards. She says, the standard approach does not work. She says, it makes people with suicidal thoughts feel worse. Just has all these extreme straw man ideas about what we're doing. And I just feel like she doesn't need to do that in order
so counterproductive
to be successful.
I agree. Because you could imagine a different video that is almost like, I don't know, 80% of the same content.
Totally.
That 20% is key, because it's like, hey, listen, I get it. This, that. And here are the things I'm bringing to the table that I've seen success with, or whatever, And
just don't even talk about psychology.
Right.
Just stick to your thing, and just
don't make it about us versus them,
or don't even refer to them, because you don't have to. You don't even have to bring them up. You know what I mean? So it's and other stuff,
because it was very defensive. It was and not only defensive in a way of no, what they're saying is not right. It's actually defensive, doubling down. No. I'm uniquely, no one else has the experience and confluence of superpowers.
Yeah.
So therefore,
she has repeated in various venues that she is uniquely qualified to help people with these issues, and no one else, including all of psychology. Now, I'll be clear. As I said before, there are problems in my field. There are embarrassing problems. We study ourselves. Psychology is a discipline of research, and we have researched many things, including our own models, including our own success rate when it comes to suicide, depression, with grief. And I don't know about suicide, but with grief in particular, there are some seminal studies that demonstrate that you're better off if you're just going to roll the dice and go to a therapist if you're suffering from grief. Mm-hmm. You're better off not going to a therapist.
Okay, that's fair data.
Now, if you go to a specialist who understands, you're better going to that therapist. But if you're just picking a random therapist that claims that they can treat grief, in all likelihood, so there's a percentage that get better, there's a percentage that stay the same, and there's a percentage that get worse. And it's something like, I can't remember the exact percentage, but I think it's 40% get worse.
Yeah. And it's I've seen the gray area. We've discussed this before too, about medicine. Even forget just mental medicine. There are some facts that I know. If I hadn't gone to the doctor when I did, if I hadn't had a thyroid operation stuff, my life was in critical danger, right?
Yeah. Meaning that, to be clear for those who don't know, you had to advocate 35 distinct times in order for your life, for you to get the right treatment.
Exactly.
So that you wouldn't potentially have major complications and maybe even die, even though the signs were all there, and none of the medical professionals were.
It was not being recognized until it was almost too late.
They were, there was a problem there, but were they just being lazy or?
Nope. It's just my things are uncommon enough to where 2 + 2 could be 4, but it's probably just 1. Yeah. It's 2 + 2 is never 1. But anyways,
and
bad analogy.
But I don't know if you're referring to this, but the major piece is that you were telling them, I don't think you understand what's happening.
Exactly.
And they weren't listening to
Exactly. But then there's a flip side. What's the flip side? Well, eventually I found a therapist, let's say, a medical professional that I did trust, and could listen to me.
Right.
And I got the care I needed, and I had a very good operation, very good outcome that I needed. I did need science.
You stayed within.
I didn't need the doctors.
You stayed within scientific evidence treatment. And imagine, though, you're not who you are. You are someone that, one, might have a little bit of skepticism about mainstream anything.
Right.
2, you don't have the time and resources or the knowledge or the internet ability to look up research to know what to do. 3, you know someone who is an alternative healer and can wave magic wands over you. and you go to them and you feel a little better.
Yeah.
Because they spend a little more time listening. Because, that's another thing about what Teal Swan does that a lot of these people do is that, especially when you go to people like psychiatrists who are just mainly doing med management, or you go to your primary doctor and they're seeing literally 5 patients in an hour. You go to someone like Teal Swan or one of her disciples, and they actually have a lot of eye contact. They validate you. They're good at listening. I mean, especially that one, I don't know if it's the word disciple. I'm saying that metaphorically, but the certified completion process practitioner, that one guy seemed like a very good, he just seemed like he had a lot of good energy. He just seemed like the sort of guy you'd want to talk to.
Yeah.
And so imagine going to one of these people, and for the first time in your life, someone actually takes the time to listen, and they validate you, but then they start sneaking in this other crap about how the fact that even though you don't know it yet, you were sexually abused by your father.
Yeah. All these problems that are happening are really because of that. Yeah.
Another thing in her shtick was that she uses a very common run-of-the-mill method of parts work and role play.
Parts work?
Parts work, like working on your parts.
Okay.
It's in internal family systems, Gestalt, experiential therapies, drama therapy, satir, other kinds of people. It's very commonplace. I do it all the time.
But what does the parts refer to? Parts of yourself?
Yeah. Well, but you can do various different manifestations of it. The way that they're doing it is, so I'll describe what I do, which is very adjacent to what they do.
Okay.
But it is not considered spiritual.
I see. Okay.
So what I do is I get, and I'll just talk about it when I do it with my students, because that's the easiest, because they're unrelated people. And this is toward the end of the quarter as well, in this same class. And I explain the whole thing, and I ask for a volunteer, and I tell them it could feel like it'll be fine emotionally, but it usually provokes a lot of emotion that you might not expect. So don't volunteer unless you're okay with that.
Right.
So someone volunteers. Usually it's one of the more talkative, extroverted person in the class.
Berto.
Well, Christy, actually.
Okay.
You've met Christy.
A Berto. So, a female Berto.
Right. So Christy, she volunteered for if I remember right. And no, I know she did actually. And so then the student steps forward, and then I say, okay, so what we're going to do is you're going to tell me a time in your life, like a snapshot moment, and you're going to think about that moment in your family, and so tell me, so pick a moment. She's like, okay, I'm 7 years old. Okay, who was in your family at the time? And so, well, my dad, my mom, and my older brother. Okay, so I want you to look among your classmates, and I want you to pick out the student that will play your dad.
Okay, interesting.
And then she picks dad, then she picks mom. Yeah, she casts her characters.
Yeah.
They come into the middle of the circle, and then I say, okay, student, so let's just go with Christy. Christy, put your dad in a statue form, or even a moving statue form, within this area here that symbolizes the emotional vibe that your father had in relation to your family. So if the father was very distant, she would put the father very far away, and he might even be facing away from the inner circle, and he might be interested in working. So he might be doing this hand movement, and he's very preoccupied with something on the outside. Mom, she would put mom, maybe mom is very codependent. So mom is, hovering over everyone and worried. And so the other student is told to have this worried face, and then brother is crying. And so brother's on the ground crying. And then I'd say, okay, put yourself into that space. And the student puts herself in the space. And then once we're all there, and it's kind of, it's a pretty somber moment, because once you start seeing it, I get chills thinking about it. Once you start seeing that play out, the audience members, you start to feel something.
Oh, I can imagine.
It's not psychic energy.
No.
It's
empathy.
Empathy.
Yeah.
And you start going,
empathy
whoa, because it's one thing and I might even start to cry, but it's one thing to hear someone describe what it was like when they were 7. It's another thing to see it visualized.
Yeah.
And then I have a series of possible questions that I kind of intuit. It's not a magical thing. It's not an interdimensional thing. It's just an experience and an empathy thing.
Right.
But I will ask the Christy in this, and I'll say, okay, now that you're here, what do you feel? What emotion do you feel? And in the beginning, they're like, well, I know how I felt when I was 7, but to be in that space again, to kind of really recreate it, sometimes very surprising emotions will emerge. And there will be explosions. I've had students that just had, explosions of emotion, because it's visceral.
Yeah.
But I'm there, and everyone in the room's a therapist. And so then and I account for, aftercare and all that kind of stuff. And they're not clients, and they understand it. But the other thing I might do is I might go to the other members. I might go to the father, the student who's playing the father, and I'd be like, what's it feel like for you?
Right.
And they will always say things. They're like, well, I feel kind of sad that I'm distant from my family. And then I ask the Christy, and I'll be like, is that possible? And she might be like, well, I never thought about it, but maybe. Now, I'm not saying your father is in the room.
Sure.
And that student is embodying your father. I'm just saying, metaphorically, that's how that actor, that student feels. And it's possible that is what your father felt, but
you've bridged dimensions.
It's grist for the mill. Now maybe, and it'll happen. The Christies of the exercise will say, "No, my dad wasn't like that," or "I think it was more like this," and it's just exploration.
Look, I can echo that in my own individual therapy. We did exercises like that, and it was always, just a murky representation of whatever. But the parts that were real were important because it was me having little moments of realization about something.
Yeah.
And that's the reality that matters,
Yeah, right. So exploration, emotional expression, validation, connecting the dots, feeling heard and understood, corrective experiences. It's all run-of-the-mill therapy stuff. Okay, so you see what I do, and there's various different permutations of that. It's very Satyrian, very internal family systems, very experiential therapies developed in the 50s, 60s, 70s, humanistic therapies. Then what we saw with the completion process is they do a very similar thing. Certain people, but I think it's assigned by the practitioner, okay, you're going to play the dad. And it seems to be just two people. You have the client and the role player.
Yeah, what they showed us was only two.
And then the idea is that the role player actually is literally embodying.
That's what I got, right?
The spirit.
They become the person.
Yeah, that wasn't implied. That was explicit, Yeah. And Teal Swan even really encouraged that because, like, one of the role players was like, I kind of felt like I was her dad, and Teal Swan, no, you were channeling him.
But see, when I first saw that, I thought it was like, well, okay, I get it, right? But then the more I looked into it afterwards, I'm like, oh, no. They mean it extremely literally.
Yeah. Spirits and all that. Yeah. Now, can it be scientifically disproven? No. But, it's not likely, but it's not uncommon. In fact, it's probably the majority of people believe that those sorts of things can happen. Yeah. We are in the minority about that belief system, science belief system, empirical science. Anyway, but so it's a very similar thing. The role player, the other person that wasn't the dad is playing the dad is probably intuiting through empathy and through trial and error, particularly if they've done it a lot. They might just kind of know certain beats that seem to work, And there were even times when I think one of the clients was like, my dad wasn't really like that. And, there was some adjustment and stuff. So, but you do that enough and it followed a very similar progression where there would be this kind of exploration in the beginning, then kind of a lock-in where the client would be like, yeah, that's just like my dad. And there would be this re-experiencing, and the role player is also kind of experiencing their own issues at their method acting, right? Yeah. And then there's pain and expression and open communication with a character in your family you never had that chance with. And then if it's a parent, it's, I'm proud of you. Yeah. You can let me go. I love you, and total healing, right? Yeah. Now, if I was in charge of that, I would be like, thank you for playing the father. Was that like your father?
Yeah.
And the client would be like, yeah, it really, okay. To be clear, that wasn't your father.
Right.
Joey just happened to just intuit, based on what you had talked about with your father.
Good job, Joey.
Yeah. But how did that feel? Was that healing to you? Was that helpful to you? Yeah. Like I've had massive growth and healing, and people will say that was the most profound experience I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
But I didn't involve any hocus pocus.
Yeah.
There were no spirits. There was no, I'm the only one that can do this. I'm doing a run-of-the-mill exercise that Gestalt therapists, IFS therapists, Satir, I learned it from them. So I'm just doing what they taught me to do. And I did it myself, and I liked it. Let me do it to you. What Teal Swan is doing is, this is me.
Sure.
No one else does this. Psychology doesn't do this. And I'm like, We invented this shit. Like you didn't invent it. I mean, maybe you invented it. But
well, and even the part that you're saying that adding the magical elements, they certainly didn't invent that either.
No. In fact, a lot of people in drama therapy and within the Satyrian tradition, not the mainstream, but many therapists who would do those kinds of exercises would claim
supernatural thing.
Yeah, we must be actually channeling because that was too accurate, and they wouldn't steer away from those interpretations.
Am I wrong? But wasn't a lot of is it Jung or Jung? Jung.
Yes.
Wasn't a lot of his stuff sort of supernatural, like elements of it where the shadow and all these things are, kind of real things?
So it's really hard to nail down. Because the language that he was using, the way he talked about it, it seems to me like there was a fair amount of that, but there was also a fair amount of metaphor that he was using.
Okay. Because what happens is that it's like Jordan Peterson, for example, uses this all the time and turns it into literal. These things are literal.
Yeah. I thought of it as a mismatch of traditions and religion. Now, I will say at the outset that literally every religion is like that.
Yep.
The Mexican version of Catholicism is a mismatch of Spanish Catholicism, which is also a mismatch of the original Catholicism of Constantine and people before him. But if you follow the through line to Mexico, they integrated the traditional paganism and belief system of the native Mexicans, which is why Mexican Catholicism is a little different from Spanish Catholicism.
Right.
And Russian Catholicism is very different. So all religions, all traditions are a mismatch of a mismatch.
Mishmash.
It's a combination.
And a mismatch.
But so I'm not saying there's something bad about that in any way, actually. It's just
I am.
But you don't like any religion.
Well, yeah. I mean, what total side story. What I think is that if we are okay with anything goes, all realities are possible. There's just no way to know. The extremists, a lot of what we're starting to experience, which is we can't even have conversations anymore because everyone's entitled to their own reality.
It's a mix of traditions and religion, including New Age, clearly New Age, just a crap ton of New Age, which is already a combination. Shamanism, Christianity, because there's overt discussions of demons and angels, this kind of thing. Native American, or at least what white Americans consider to be Native American. Buddhism, which again is what white Americans believe Buddhism to be, which is not what real Buddhism is, as someone that is Japanese. And also, anyway, point is there's nothing wrong with that. Similar to people in the Philippines that have a combination of Catholicism and proto-religious beliefs from native Filipino people. It's not like they're not Catholics. You know what I mean? They just have their Filipino version of Catholicism. It's fine. But anyway, point is that it's, anyway, Hinduism, yoga, astrology, energy healing, other kinds of things. So there's a lot in there that is nothing new that I'm positive she learned when she was in her early career, not only in China as a child, but also at the self-help New Age shop that she was in her early adulthood. Let's take a break. When we get back, we'll evaluate, is Teal Swan a cult? What do you say?
Let's do it.
Okay, we're back from the break. At this point, we don't have all the information that we will eventually have, but we will try to look into, is Teal Swan a cult? And so we've been doing episodes on cults for many, many years. And every time I do this, I develop a new list of criteria for cults.
You advance the list, yeah.
And this time I feel like I hope I've solidified
Dialed it in.
Yeah. And this is, my model pulled from other models. I didn't invent any of these ideas.
It's a mishmash.
But it's a mismatch. And it's also, there's a lot of overlap in the criteria. So it's not like each criterion is a separate set of things. You might go like, well, we already kind of talked about. So you tell me, Berto, and I'm going to kind of stay out of this because I want more information.
You're reserving judgment.
Because I really want to remain open. Number one, there's a charismatic and authoritarian leader.
Yes.
Okay.
True. Are we grading this?
Give your data, yeah.
It is. She is known by a name that is the brand almost. She is very charismatic. very authoritarian, and those around her reinforce that authority. And it seems like if you go against that authority, it is not welcome.
Okay. So these are sub-criteria within this first criterion. Grandiose leader. So this is someone that they are the best, they're special, they're unique, they're messianic.
Right. She's going to be bigger than the Pope.
Yeah. They're the catalyst for all humankind, that kind of thing. Yes or no?
Yes. She with the person she's working with, the publicist guy, that used to coach tennis, I guess, they're going to be bigger than Tony Robbins, and she wants to tongue-in-cheek be bigger than the Pope, but not so tongue-in-cheek. She believes she is uniquely qualified to help the world in all these respects. I do believe there's a...
Yeah. And on one respect, you'd say, well, there's nothing wrong with having a career goal. But I would extend it to help a little bit, because I said I wasn't going to put my finger on the scale on any, but there's a lot of talk that maybe you haven't heard from the documentary that I heard, or the podcast that I heard, where, well, you do know from some of her videos that she says she's better than all psychologists.
Yeah.
She's better than all medical professionals. Right. So that sounds like grandiosity to me.
Yep.
Just going to take it.
I mean, because so we've talked about also, grandiosity comes with a lot of these tech charismatic leaders and stuff like that. And it's true. And many of them are ridiculously grandiose. I can certainly name some related to Twitter, for example, but this is one of those cases. You can't deny it.
Another sub-criterion is no accountability for the leadership. They can do whatever they want, and that critics are always wrong and critics are always the enemy. Is that true?
There's certainly evidence for a lot of that. As an example, she agreed to hire this investigator. They actually, I didn't feel that they came back with like horrible life-ending news. They came back saying, well, it doesn't look like you're causing suicides, but there are some cultish elements.
Right.
That was like the life-ending news to her.
Yeah.
And then she took it out on the guys, like, you gotta fix this. Like, and then, when she was challenged, there was this scene where she takes such pleasure. This guy is like, the British dude, he's like, I mean, are you saying there's no one above you or something, something like this? And she's like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, well, I have a problem with that. And she's like, so, I mean, if you went and you found the best tennis player, you would not follow them because there was no one better than them, right? And then he's kind of silenced by that, and you can see a smirk in her face. Like, I don't know if it was edited, but it's like she got him, So there's little elements like that where I do believe like opposition is met with all the force, and like, no, we're not gonna have it.
Yeah.
But that's what I saw I actually saw less of it, to be honest, in the account, because I watched one video about someone who left the thing. And they certainly said, look, I don't follow Teal anymore and stuff like that. At the same time, they didn't make it sound as egregious as one might think from what was shown in the...
Right. So can you say that there's no accountability for leadership and point to certain elements? Sure. But when you compare to what I would consider to be more full-blown cults, she is nothing close to that, where people will literally be tortured if they criticize, and they won't allow documentary crews into the compound, and they won't talk to the press. They won't let their members talk to anyone outside. So there, as the private investigator said, cultish elements, yes, but it's certainly not as bad as other kind. Even like NXIVM was way worse than this, and NXIVM isn't as bad as the children of God.
Absolutely.
This kind of. So other things is the leadership demands or manipulates people to get admiration. Is that happening?
I did see that in the documentary. The other videos I watched she was never with, it was always either an interview of hers or other people. But in the documentary, I felt like she was using the other participants, her other next in lines or whatever, the people in her close circle, putting social pressure to be like, without literally saying, hey, you need to agree with me because this person's disagreeing with me. But it's like, hey, why don't you give me the list of what you think she thinks about me? And then you do the same. It's like these very awkward things. And of course, everyone just falls in line. That to me was evidence of that.
Yeah. Number two. So number one was charismatic, grandiose leader, then authoritarian leader. Number two, we have isolation of the followers. So isolation from non-members like society, family, friends, mainstream church, can't be a member of another system, forbid contact with outsiders, vilify outsiders, can't leave the compound, isolation from fellow members. Manufacture in full-blown coats, they will manufacture paranoia between the people, and will also make sure that no bonds are created so that they can talk amongst themselves. And then also isolation from your own mind. And I actually got these criteria from a woman I interviewed on the podcast like 3 or 4 years ago, and we recently reran her episode.
About the trafficking?
No? It might have been,
okay.
But she was just an expert on cults.
Oh, she was an expert. Okay.
And
all right.
She laid out those 3, because we all understand that they isolate from family members, but they also will isolate the members from each other and isolate the members from their own mind. And I thought that was really brilliant. So is there that within Teal Swan's following?
I don't know. That's a little harder to say. I did see that, like I said, within her inner circle, there are certainly rules about like it's a risk to us if you start developing bonds and relationships. And it sounded like after what's his name left, they were going to even get harsher about that. Like, no, now you basically you really can't have relationships here. And the thing about like babies, I can't be woken up by a crying baby. Okay, no, none of us want babies.
Okay, so I heard a further clarification on that, and I don't know if it's true, that was edited in a weird way, that in reality it was, I can't have children waking me up. You can have kids, but you can't have them in my building when I'm trying to sleep, or you can certainly have kids.
Sure.
But can't have them.
Okay.
But the way it looked, it was like...
It looked like you can't have kids.
You can't ever have kids.
Well, but especially because the women, someone said, none of us want kids or something like this.
Right. So, but you could imagine that Teal Swan's attitude about having kids, and if you just look at the verbatim, it's like, well, they can have kids, but I just don't want them around me. But the unspoken message is,
I think there's
I don't want you to have kids at all.
There's pressure there.
But could someone have a kid and not be kicked out or incur any kind of major consequence?
Yeah.
Hard to know.
Yeah, so like I said, and then from the ones I heard, there were people that were either still in it or out. The one dude who had left, he certainly talked about getting threatened by other members, not like Teal or anything, but other members when they were leaving. But they didn't talk so much about these sort of like, I was locked in a room for 2 days, and I didn't see evidence of that kind of stuff.
Right. So, it's like people talking crap on Facebook or something, which is in the direction cultish.
It is. But
number 3, systems of control. So controlling your thoughts, your attire, behavior, speech, travel, etc. Severe punishments for leaving, punishments for questioning, punishments for stepping out of line. It usually gets more progressive as you get into the cult, more formally. It, starts with mind control, it increases in control for each individual. The followers are made to feel ashamed of themselves as a way of trying to control them. Like if I make everyone feel like they're a piece of crap, and I am the one that can make them not a piece of crap, then I have more control where there are those things. So not that last one, but controlling their thoughts, punishments for leaving, punishments for questioning, punishments for stepping out of line.
So this is an interesting one because on the one hand, there certainly wasn't. So like when it comes to the clothing, okay, no, they weren't all wearing white robes. I felt that whatever they were wearing seemed, I don't know, whatever they were wearing. Yeah. I didn't notice any weird
looked very
or
typical West, except for that one guy that wore the spurs and the.
Which seemed like that's what they wanted to wear,
Yeah. Like so that one guy, he had just a basketball jersey on, and that didn't seem to be the typical attire.
No, so I didn't get that sense. And more to the point, I actually didn't notice like them all, like every time someone finishes speaking, yes, and blah, 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 or like some sort of ritualistic thing, or that wasn't evident. So there wasn't that. At the same time, so on the one hand, people did seem emboldened to say things like, I just don't agree. Like that one gal's like, oh no, we're not going there, bitch. Or like, I'm pretty sure in a lot of cults, you couldn't say that to your leader.
Right.
However, there are consequences to those behaviors.
Yeah.
And there's another aspect. So there was that guy who she brings in for a, whatever they called it. And he's like, so tell me, what's happening with you? And then he's trying to explain. And, he's animated.
Was it the basketball jersey guy or was it the other guy?
The one who tells her that he maybe he's just there because he finds her attractive. That guy. He's kind of like very close cropped hair, darker skin.
Basketball guy.
Yeah, so he's in there. Now, he talks very animatedly, like sort of like I would. And he's a little bit multi-directional.
He was kind of like you. That's funny.
He's like that. So he's talking. And then she says, very aggressively, do you know how hard it is to talk with you or listen to you or whatever? Yeah. And he's like, oh. And then she's like, and then she says something really like, everything you say is wrong. I'm totally paraphrasing, but where he's like, oh, I don't know. I thought I was expressing myself, but I guess. And then he says, what I believe he was being honest, and unfortunately, it's of course an uncomfortable thing to say, but I feel like he got this impression in his head that this is a safe space and I'm encouraged to tell my truth. So he goes, maybe I'm just here because I'm attracted to you. And I find you sexually attractive.
So he's trying to be honest.
He's trying to be honest. Now, is that awkward? Of course. But she's a professional, one of the most qualified people in the world. And the way she deals with it is that after the session, she's freaking out and she's on the phone. And it's like, do you know what this guy just told me? Like, what? Why are you even telling someone else like, this is between you? That whole thing to me seemed like, there are consequences. There are consequences if you speak a certain way and if you challenge.
And not only that, but the way in which even the very beginning of that conversation, like the way I interpret it, is hard to know, is that there's a way that people slot into responding to her, particularly because one of the things I learned from the podcast was that the followers don't get much time with Teal Swan. They spend most of their time with themselves or with the certified people. And when they finally get to talk to Teal Swan, there's a lot of reverence and a lot of worship. And the impression I got was there's a way in which she and maybe everyone kind of wants it to go. And it's that very typical interaction that she would often have on stage, where someone would say, I'm lost and I don't know what to do. And, and then Teal Swan says a few things and it seems to have a really big effect. And maybe it does legitimately. But if it's anything other than something in that category, the interpretation I had was that Teal Swan gets upset.
And annoyed. like, ugh.
And doesn't...
Sort of disgusted. There was a level of disgust to her reaction.
Right. And then a punishment that's very subtle and not overt to the client. As a therapist, I can tell you that happens all the time.
Yeah, of course.
Especially when I have a new client, particularly if I have a client that isn't seemingly very enthusiastic to be in therapy, like their parents are forcing them, and I'm trying my best, and or even in group therapy with teenagers or something. And of course, I would love it if I could have this zinger and then a client breaks down crying and, oh my God, you're the best therapist of all time. That feels good. But if it's anything other than that, I don't punish them. I'm just like, well, I usually just think I'm not doing a good job. Like there's something wrong with me.
This is just the mark of a different level of ability and knowledge about the field and knowledge about how to deal with those. So me with my therapist, I'd be, especially at first, talking a million miles a minute, going from this topic to that topic and stuff. My therapist could have said something like, do you know how frustrating it is to listen to you?
Right. Now, that's not necessarily untherapeutic as an opener, but
she did something.
But if your whole purpose is to punish you and to blame you, then
Well, and she did something that, in my mind, was way more effective, which was like, hey, let me try something. Let's take some breath. Whoop, veered me way off course. Yeah. The thing is, there are people that know how to do this, and they do it in a way that is more empathetic, frankly. Now,
and more helpful, I would think, more flexible to the client.
I imagine. Now, her approach seems to work for a lot of people, in whatever ways. So she has learned that this direct, no nonsense, I'm going to tear you down approach is that's my brand.
Yeah.
But still, I remember as an example in my field of my profession, you see this. People start climbing the ladder. And then they start believing that they're infallible and that their time is more valuable than everyone else's. So you go to the one meeting a month that you have with these individuals. They're like, what's the order of business? And you have very few seconds. And if you're not ordering your words just in the right way and you're already nervous, they're like, yeah. And they want to make snap decisions. And they think I'm just like so smart that I can make these snap decisions, forgetting that they're still a human that just like got a little luckier. And maybe they're smart, but that doesn't mean they're always right. And I say I've done that too. When I was younger and I started climbing the ranks, I remember getting that feeling of like, what do you need? And like quickly, like because I'm thinking, well, my time is super valuable. I'm so smart. I can make snap judgments on everything. I saw that in myself. I saw it in people. I saw that in her. She gets to that level where she's like, I'm such an expert at this that in one snap of a second, I can tell what's wrong with you.
Yeah. It reminds me of, you brought up the Kung Fu masters who can cause all their students to fall down without even touching them.
Exactly.
It's this emperor isn't you know, the emperor has no clothes, or the emperor's new robe?
Emperor's new clothes. Yeah.
Yeah. That and everyone who is a super follower believes that to be true, the leader ends up believing the lie because everyone's saying it and everyone's treating you that way, that with one word, you can solve everyone's problems because people are primed or they want to please you, or it's like going to a revival and you believe so much, and you know there's this placebo effect, and there's no follow-up to see if it actually sustained the, you know, because someone will say I'm in chronic pain, and then you know, evangelical person comes up and puts hands on and says demon be gone, and the person stands up and says I'm not in pain anymore. It's very possible that the person actually in that moment does not feel pain. In all likelihood the next day they will, but who knows. And if you're the leader, you're like, I literally have healing powers.
Right.
And because if you have at least some semblance of the foundation for that belief system, all the evidence is there. You're a genius. And with one flick of the wrist, or with one word or one sentence to a client,
one cutting remark.
You can, and so when you run up against someone, the very rare individual that doesn't work with, you're like, well, something must be wrong with you. You know, if you don't have a tradition, if you don't have a supervisor, if you don't have any training, if you have a personality issue, then that must be the answer, because any other answer is intolerable.
But in summary, in answer to your original question, I saw some evidence of it being an unsafe environment to some extent to question and push back, but other evidence that it's surprisingly more possible to do so.
And could someone like the basketball jersey guy just say, yeah, I want my money back, I want to go home?
It seemed like they could.
Right. So that's not a cult. That's just like someone who is a very rigid, you know, helper. Can some therapists be like that? Yeah. Okay. Next one, number 4, indoctrination. So this is recruitment. So you want to appeal to vulnerable people that you either know or maybe inadvertently know are more likely to be susceptible to occult influence. And you start with relatable things, and then you get more elaborate, more controlling. There's love bombing. You want to provoke intense emotional experiences, and you want to brainwash. Do they have this criterion?
You know, one thing I didn't see was the love bombing, but it might happen. I didn't see that as much. I almost felt like, because even in the big events with tons and tons of people, when the people were on stage, she wasn't like, well, you're in a great safe space now, let's tell them how much we love them, everyone. I didn't see that.
There's a little bit of that.
Yeah, but it was, I guess so. I've been
but not in a bad way.
I've been in those environments.
Yeah.
So I know when it's smarmy and really like scary.
Certainly.
Oh, and it's gross because you see that there's plants around you that are cheering on in this weird way, and you know that they're paying so much attention to you, and you're so special to them.
They're targeting you.
Oh yeah. I didn't see that as much.
Right.
Like, but maybe.
Doesn't seem like.
Yeah.
But definitely appeal to vulnerable people.
Yes, definitely that.
Because now one could say appealing to vulnerable people, another would say appealing to those sorts of people that would benefit from her thing.
And that's a hard one to say. Like, oh no, Tony Robbins is going after people that need help in their life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard, right?
Well, so one of the details that maybe you didn't know that I learned in the podcast was that she, I think, even mentions that she uses SEO regarding suicidal thoughts.
She did. Yeah, I did see that. Yeah, that they actually do look at the queries that people make most often.
Yeah.
And then they try to make sure that people land like flies.
So on one hand, you'd say that's manipulative. On the other side, you'd say, well, that's marketing.
But you're trying to find your audience.
Right.
That's a hard one for me. So the thing I would look for would be more like, okay, the more predatory thing is like you deceive people by saying, hey, we're having a get together about for a community project, and you show up and you have tea and like, oh, what is this about? Oh, it's all sorts of cool stuff we're doing for the. Hey, tell me more about yourself.
Yeah.
And then you're looking, and the people are taking notes. Okay, that person over there, they said that to me is predatory. Now I don't know if they do it. Maybe they do that, but I've seen that done.
Doesn't seem
that
like it.
Happens.
Yeah.
That has been done to me.
Doesn't seem like it, because the main progression, and some people just end at certain levels, is YouTube video watching. Then it's a revival or whatever they call it. Then it's the retreats, and then it's inner circle.
Yeah.
Right. So the vast majority of people never go beyond the YouTube videos, but only some go to the town hall meetings. and only some of those go to the retreats, right? So the recruitment is kind of out in the open.
Yeah.
It's like there's
and
just a YouTube video.
It's not misrepresenting, well, at least from
you're not in a room of people manipulating you.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right. Wait, like the second time I got tried to get roped into Amway, they literally lied about who they were and what they were doing.
Yeah.
They told me they were they didn't even say we're Amway, of course. And that is so bad. They called me saying they were recruiting me for a tech company.
Yeah. Me too.
I mean, come on. Like, and then you think, well, once you go to coffee, they'll say, okay, here's what. No. In fact, they never said what it was until I raised my hand. I'm like,
yeah, we've talked about this before, but I was so confused because I actually, this is the 90s. So in the early 90s, you looked in the paper. And so in the classifieds, help wanted sections, there's this, tech company or something. And I call the number and the guy's like, great, I'm setting up some interviews. I'd love you to come in.
You seem like just the right kind.
And I'm like, interview? Holy crap, right? Because it's so hard to even get them to return your call. And he's like, so, I'm going to be on the way home, or something like that. So I'm going to meet you at McDonald's
I know.
in Wallingford.
Mine was a Starbucks.
And I'm like, okay. And, but I'm in such a mode of pleasing. Right. I'm just like, okay, great. Wherever you want to meet at the McDonald's. And he's just yammering at me about things I have no idea.
Shows you a chart. Look at this. We're working with all these companies.
Not even really that.
Oh, really?
Like I didn't get
they
anything.
were better prepared by the time they got
And then he had this like tote cardboard case thing with like books and videotapes and materials. And he's like, okay, I want you to look this over. And I remember just so the whole time I'm in this mode of like trying to please him because I'm the one
trying being interviewed.
I'm trying to get the job. I'm trying to get the job. And then, so at no point am I thinking to question him. Right. I'm just trying to act like I know what he's talking about. Yeah. Oh, totally. And I'm like, I have no idea what he's talking about. And then at the very end, he gives me the saying, I want you to look this over. And I'm like, okay, so do I have the job or something? He's like, well, it's not really like, I can't remember what it was, but I remember being so confused. And then when I got home, I start looking at this stuff and I'm like,
what?
I don't even really know what's happening. It wasn't until, and I just never called him back. It wasn't until a couple years later, I was like, that was like an Amway thing.
Yeah.
That was an Amway. Anyway.
That's so funny. But it's that kind of thing where there's misrepresentation.
Yeah. And then we've talked about the other one that we went to where for me, it was a water filter thing, and every other person, and again, a similar thing, like it was applying for a job, and it was trying to make us sell these water filters and door-to-door salesmen.
Right.
And it wasn't a job, it was completely commission, and every other participant in the room was a plant.
Yeah.
That would be oh, wow, this is a great presentation.
That sounds so good.
Yeah.
And I mean, to bring Landmark up again, that was also so shady. I get invited to the graduation of my friend. Hey, come to my graduation. That sounds great. It's not a freaking graduation.
It's a recruitment.
Yeah. It's so shady. So yeah, those kinds of things to me. And again, I don't know if they do it, but I didn't see that evidence.
Right. Number 5, there's no legitimate reason to leave.
No legitimate reason to leave.
Yeah, because the full-blown
I see what you're saying. Like, they're like, I think I want to go because that's not a legitimate reason.
Yeah, there's absolutely no legitimate reason to leave the cult in, David Koresh cults, other cults.
Well, I mean, there's people that have left. I don't know how strongly they felt pressure to stay.
Seems like maybe a little bit.
There is some.
But probably not a lot, because I think we have to define, like, well, what is... Certainly the YouTube video people aren't... Certainly they're not even close to being in a cult. Maybe there's some cultish things.
I didn't look into her financial model. Like, do you subscribe? I don't know. But, okay, so from what we watched, there certainly weren't any scenes other than the main dude, her friend, the guy. But that was different, even though that was a very unhealthy scene. That's like they've had a relationship for years and years and years. So the fact that she couldn't deal with it well, that's bad enough. But that's not like some random cult member wanting to leave a cult and being told, your parents don't love you. You don't want to go back to that house.
It was more like an old friend, business partner who is just kind of done with you.
I need to get back to school. Schooling has no answers for you.
Yeah.
Like whatever. That wasn't there.
Right. And the last one, hard evidence of the above criteria being met, not just, speculation.
Yeah, let's see. Well, I do think there's hard evidence about the charismatic leader.
Yeah, statements that are right out of the playbook.
Yeah.
So, and I haven't read all the... And by the way, I have taken 131 pages of notes, and that will probably grow. And within my notes are a lot of accounts of people. In fact, I'm looking at some of them right now, but I haven't really cleaned them up. But so I'm going to look over those eventually.
Because like the thing I watched that was 3 hours long with her friend, her childhood friend talking, that is all accounts about her, not the cult, not her thing. It's just about her. Now they made inferences about things, and the main guy leading it's this Mormon guy who is also a therapist, and he's actually a licensed therapist and stuff. So he was interspersing things like, "Oh, that seems unethical" or whatever. But it's true that like there's not that much hard evidence that of all the. Now the investigator, I should say we should put some weight to that. The investigator found some evidence of cultish behaviors. And I think that's probably evidenced in the documentary where you see things like it's dangerous to get in a relationship. Apparently we have to really like, the other thing is her anger and her, being displeased. And she's like, I am very upset. I am very angry right now.
Yeah. And you're not even, I mean, you're saying the words, but the energy she was giving.
Yeah. I am irate. Like that kind of thing does spell danger, if not now, later.
While everyone else sits there and listens.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, so recently, a person was let go from a big tech company that for years I heard horror story after horror story of verbal abuse, but horrible. And you're in the super high up, VP level, verbal abuse, years and years. Finally, they got let go because of like 20 people made accusations of like different aspects of sexual harassment and abuse. I mean, and so those are red flags. And when they go rewarded and, unpunished, that is happening to her. And I think that is a problem.
What's happening to her?
That she's going rewarded and unpunished for those kinds of abusive things.
Right.
And so the longer that goes, I think if it's not already causing severe harm, I think it could.
Could get worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows? Hard to say. And it's possible with what I'm predicting to be a greater fame and money that she might... Well, so I could see it going one of three ways. One is it just she stays the course and it looks very similar a few years from now, but she's continued to shed some of the more concerning things. I could see it getting worse in that she gets more money, more negative attention, more paranoia, more walls go up, more non-negotiables, as we saw at the end of the documentary. And it actually does become problematic, not as problematic as Keith Raniere, but more emotional control, more paranoia, more difficulty. Not terrible cult, but more cultish, as the private investigators are. Or I could see it getting even better because I think it's possible, getting back to her early childhood trauma and her personality, that over the years she might be continually kind of getting better and healing from her own issues, as she will openly talk about, or not openly, but refer to anyway. And over time, that would mean that she'll be better able to regulate her emotions, maybe find more fulfilling relationships. Did you know that she's been married 5 times?
Yes.
And she's had something like 13
that is so
relationships.
To think about.
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? Some people get married a lot. But I just wonder... what's the story there, if there is a story there. But anyway, my point is that I could see things getting better for her and her organization as she matures and relaxes a little bit, gets a little bit more of her needs met, and doesn't get so triggered and doesn't have to utilize some of the emotional control that she seems to exhibit sometimes.
I feel like the one of the big risks is that success and power are so dangerous. Like, you take someone like Elon Musk. 5 years ago, I used to think, oh man, that guy's cool. He's trying to save the planet, got great. The more billions and power he's gotten, he's probably always been like this. And then you realize, oh God, we've created a supervillain. What the?
Well, so
because now he doesn't care. Now he's like.
So we'll end with this. Is as I'm watching and thinking and evaluating Teal Swan, I started having these intrusive thoughts and questions as to, am I like Teal Swan? Because there are elements that Teal Swan does that I do. she has followers. I have followers. She helps people. I help people. She's on YouTube. I'm on YouTube. Now, I don't know if people would consider us similar, but I want to be honest and say that I think about this. And even before watching the Teal Swan documentary, it was in the morning, and Stacy and I were having breakfast on the deck, and there's this guy called, do you watch Samurai Guitarist on YouTube?
You've told me about him. I don't.
Half Japanese guy, Canadian, really great guy, funny, interesting, and great hair. And he was getting kind of burnt out making YouTube videos. He was running out of things to do. And during the pandemic, he was kind of cut off from a lot of people. So he was saying, I'm getting burnt out, even though he has like 1 million subscribers, but he's like, I want to do something in person with people. So he's starting to do these in-person workshops in San Diego for, I would say, a pretty low price. I think he's just charging like $500 for like a few days or something, which is for a conference like that, it's pretty low.
Right.
Like, for example, Teal Swan's like week or 2 week thing is like $5,000 or something.
Geez, okay.
And so I don't want to misquote, but anyway, so he was talking about doing that, and as he was talking about him, I'm kind of thinking about myself. I'm like, I always did want to, even before I became a YouTuber, I always wanted to have kind of those couple retreats where for even a week, or maybe just 3 days at the very least, where you get couples, and I would have all these exercises, and I would bring other therapists, and I'd have other speakers, and because there's a lot that I could really do, because a lot of the couples that I treat, it's like 1 hour a week, and we get stuff done. But if I could really get my teeth into,
because you're uniquely qualified.
No, it's something that a lot of other therapists do. John Gottman does stuff like this anyway. So,
but you can see their aura, which is something.
But I just thought it'd be interesting to do, and would be different or something. And so I started thinking, well, Samurai Guitarist is going to do this. Like, maybe I could do some kind of in-person thing to have some professional gratification, to help people, and to meet people too, right? To just have that experience. Yeah. And as we were talking about it, and Stacy seemed kind of into it, because she just went to a photography retreat in Arizona, and she had a great time, because she follows this one photographer on YouTube, and she, had this, it was like summer camp for photographers.
Wow, that's cool.
And, I feel like with the pandemic loosening up, it seems like maybe that's an option. So we were talking about it. She's, saying, oh yeah, you could do this, you could do this. And then it suddenly hit me, people might treat me like I'm a guru.
Right.
I don't want that. And I was like, and then I immediately just said, put the brakes on the whole conversation. It's like, no. I don't want to meet people in person, because if they treat me like I'm some sort of god, I don't know what to do with that, because I don't want that. And am I supposed to shut it down? Like, don't treat me that way.
Yeah.
And
and then you become that god, the one that's like, don't refer to me as a god.
Yeah.
I am just like you.
Well, but then I thought, well, I'm guessing there's an approach. Like I said, I thought because the way that Teal Swan does what she does, and I think seemingly, and I think what a lot of the cult leaders and the people who want worship will do is they'll have their grand entrance. Osho with his grand entrance, he comes in on his Rolls Royce, and I was like, well, what if I was at the registration desk? You know what I mean?
Just greeting people.
Yeah, I'm just like, hey, what's your name? And they're like, hey, it's you. And I'm like, yeah.
He is so pure of heart.
Yeah.
He's here with the little people.
But I would, I would eat lunch with them.
Oh, I got to touch him at the front desk.
I'd fart with them. I would.
Beautiful fart. Listen, I think, look, it is a real, I do believe power corrupts. I do believe it. I, in my own little small way, I have been a victim of that early in my career when I got some early successes, and then I became, I didn't realize I was becoming the boss from the UK office. And there's this great scene in the UK office. That show is so insightful. There's this great scene where they're having a workshop with an outside moderator because upper management decreed that it would be so. And David Brent, the boss, feels so threatened by this. So he's always trying to interject to do things better, because he feels threatened that some other guy would tell his employees what to do. Okay. And there's a moment where someone asks him if he plays music, and David Brent's like, oh yeah, I write songs. So then he starts playing music, and all his employees, of course, because they have to, they're like this. And then he starts acting like a rock star. And it is a very telling moment that I think I could relate to, which is when you get a little modicum of success, all of a sudden you start feeling like a little better about yourself.
Yeah.
So it can be corrupting, and
if you're insecure,
like me. No, but it can be, and if you're narcissistic, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's based on insecurity.
But it doesn't mean that it has to be bad. It doesn't mean that you can't control some aspect of it. It doesn't mean that there is no version of that you couldn't do and have it be a healthy thing.
Yeah. And, but that's a smaller point to my larger point, which is as I go through this deep dive, as I go through this rabbit hole series of episodes on Teal Swan, I'm going to, I don't know when, but I'm going to actually systematically evaluate what I do in relation to the criteria that I'm setting for Teal Swan. There's even parts of her personality that I share. I would like to think to a lesser extent, but to some extent.
Really?
Sensitivity to criticism. I'm pretty sensitive to criticism. And yeah, so anyway, point is there's elements there, and I want to plant that seed, which is to think, because people could say to me, well, if they didn't like me, they would say, well, you have a cult because you do this and you do that and you do this. And so I want to seriously look at that.
Do it. I think it's a valuable exercise, but there's bridges that you must cross well before I think you're on your way there.
Well, there's a Ghislaine Maxwell for every Jeffrey Epstein.
That's true. I'm the enabler.
And everyone out there, take care of yourself. You better take. What would a cult leader do?
Remember what we talked about?
I am uniquely qualified to help you to take care of yourself.
Because the 3 power words decree it, and you deserve it.
The 3 power words.